The chandeliers above Aeternum's rooftop terrace cast golden light across white tablecloths and crystal glasses. Manhattan's skyline glittered behind floor-to-ceiling windows, a backdrop of wealth and power that made every guest feel untouchable. Emma Dawson stood frozen near the bar, her second-hand dress suddenly feeling like sandpaper against her skin. She'd only wanted to leave quietly, to slip out through the service entrance and disappear into the subway tunnels where she belonged. But her worn sneakers had squeaked against the polished marble floor, and that single sound had been enough. Gavin Hale turned his head like a predator catching movement. "You," his voice cut through the gentle murmur of conversation. "What are you still doing here?" Every head in the dining room swiveled toward Emma. She felt her throat tighten. "I was just leaving. I'm sorry. Sorry?" Gavin stepped away from his table of investors, his tailored suit catching the light. He was handsome in that sharp, dangerous way that made people lean in when he spoke. "You stumble into my kitchen wearing discount store clothes. You handle my ingredients with unwashed hands, and now you're lurking near my guests?" Emma's face burned. "I helped because your staff asked me to. I didn't mean—" "Look at her," Gavin announced to the room, his voice rising with performative disgust. "This is what happens when charity cases confuse temporary proximity with belonging." A woman in diamonds whispered something behind her hand. Two men in suits exchanged amused glances. Emma took a step backward, but Gavin moved closer, his eyes cold and bright. "You will never sit at a table like this," he declared, his arm sweeping across the opulent space. "Not even in your dreams." The words hit like a physical blow. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Someone laughed, a sharp bark of cruel amusement that others quickly joined. Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes, felt her hands trembling, felt the weight of every gaze pressing down on her like stones. She turned and ran. Her sneakers squeaked again as she fled toward the elevator, past servers who averted their eyes, past the hostess stand where a woman pretended to study a reservation book. The elevator doors closed on the sound of resumed conversation, on Gavin's smooth voice already moving to another topic, on the casual cruelty of people who would forget her face before dessert arrived. Emma pressed her forehead against the cool metal wall and finally let herself cry. The F-train rattled through the tunnel toward Queens, fluorescent lights flickering overhead. Emma sat wedged between a sleeping man and a teenager with headphones, her reflection ghostly in the dark window across from her. Her eyes were still red, but she'd stopped crying somewhere around Lexington Avenue. She couldn't afford to waste time on tears. Her phone buzzed with a notification from the food delivery app. Her rating had dropped after missing 2 orders tonight. Another buzz, a text from her aunt's nurse asking about next week's payment. Emma closed her eyes and let her head rest against the vibrating window. This was her life. This had always been her life. The apartment in Astoria was barely larger than Gavin Hale's kitchen office. Emma unlocked 3 separate locks and stepped into the cramped studio where her Aunt Carol slept in the only bedroom, separated from the main space by a curtain Emma had hung herself. The air smelled like medication and the chicken soup she'd made yesterday. Emma kicked off her sneakers and moved quietly to the kitchenette. 2 burners, a microwave older than she was, a mini fridge that hummed constantly. She'd learned to cook here anyway, practicing techniques she'd studied during her 2 semesters at the Culinary Institute before everything fell apart. Before her mother died, before the bills came, before dreams became luxuries she couldn't afford. She opened the fridge and surveyed its contents. Eggs, butter, half an onion, some tired-looking vegetables from the discount bin. Most people would see scraps. Emma saw possibility. Her mother had taught her that. "Food is love made visible," she used to say, her hands moving expertly through prep work in their old kitchen. "It doesn't matter if it's caviar or cabbage. What matters is the care you put into it." Emma pulled out the cutting board, the one good knife she owned, purchased from a restaurant supply store with her first paycheck. Her hands moved automatically, dicing the onion, whisking eggs, creating something from almost nothing. She worked until her mind went quiet, until the humiliation at Aeternum faded into the rhythm of the knife, the sizzle of butter in the pan, the familiar meditation of cooking. Nobody would taste this omelette. Nobody would photograph it or review it, or judge whether she deserved to make it. That was fine. She was making it anyway. At 2 a.m., after her aunt's medications were sorted and tomorrow's schedule was planned, Emma finally lay down on the pull-out couch. She stared at the water-stained ceiling and thought about Gavin Hale's words. "You will never sit at a table like this." He was probably right. People like her didn't get tables like that. They got narrow cots in studio apartments and alarm clocks set for 5:30 and 3 different uniforms hanging behind the bathroom door. They got subway tokens instead of taxi rides, instant coffee instead of espresso, dreams deferred until they fossilized into regrets. Emma turned on her side and pulled the thin blanket up to her chin. Tomorrow she had a morning shift at the diner in Long Island City, an afternoon shift at the grocery store, and evening deliveries if she could get her rating back up. Somewhere in between, she'd figure out how to pay the nurse and keep the electricity on, and maybe, if she was lucky, sleep for 4 hours. The ceiling fan creaked overhead, counting down the minutes until her alarm would scream. This was her world, small and tired and perpetually behind on everything that mattered. But it was hers. Gavin Hale's penthouse overlooked Central Park from the 62nd floor, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view that cost more per month than most people earned in a year. He stood in his kitchen, all marble and stainless steel, equipped with appliances most restaurants couldn't afford, scrolling through his phone as his espresso machine hissed softly. Another article about him, another glowing review, another magazine wanting an interview. He smiled, the expression never quite reaching his eyes. The car service arrived at 7 sharp as always. Black SUV, tinted windows, driver who knew better than to attempt conversation. Gavin sat in the back reading emails, responding to requests from investors, declining 3 television appearances because his schedule was already packed. Everyone wanted a piece of Gavin Hale. Everyone wanted to say they knew him, had eaten at his restaurant, had been touched by his particular brand of genius. He'd built this empire from nothing, and he never let anyone forget it. Aeternum occupied the top floor of a glass tower in Midtown, accessible only by private elevator. The restaurant didn't advertise, they didn't need to. 3 Michelin stars and a 6-month waiting list spoke loudly enough. Gavin had designed every inch of it himself. The lighting that made everyone look wealthy, the acoustics that turned conversations into murmurs, the menu that changed weekly and cost more than some people's rent. He pushed through the kitchen doors at 8, exactly on schedule. "Morning, chef," his sous chef Marcus called out, already prepping stations for lunch service. Gavin didn't respond. He walked the line, inspecting each station with the focus of a surgeon examining an operating room. His fingers traced the edge of a cutting board, not quite clean enough. He picked up a paring knife, tested its sharpness, set it down with a barely perceptible shake of his head. "Who sharpened these?" he asked quietly. Marcus tensed. "That was supposed to be done last night, chef. I'll handle it right now." "You'll handle it." Gavin turned, his voice still soft but edged with steel. "This is a Michelin-starred kitchen, Marcus. We don't handle things. We execute them perfectly the first time, or we don't deserve to be here." The kitchen had gone silent. Gavin could feel every cook holding their breath, waiting to see if this would be one of his bad days. He let the tension build for a moment longer, then nodded once. "Sharpen them, all of them, and if I find a single dull blade tomorrow, you're gone." Marcus exhaled. "Yes, chef." Gavin continued his inspection. A container of herbs in the walk-in was wilting slightly. Unacceptable. He threw it in the trash without a word. A prep cook had arranged vegetables with slight asymmetry. Gavin stopped, stared at the cutting board for a long moment, then swept the entire thing into the garbage. "Start over," he said. "If you can't make vegetables beautiful, how can you possibly create art?" The cook's face flushed red, but she nodded and began again. This was excellence. This was what separated Aeternum from every other restaurant in the city. Gavin refused to accept mediocrity, refused to tolerate laziness, refused to let people who didn't understand true artistry pollute his vision with their ordinary standards. By 10 a.m., he was in his office taking a call from a journalist at Food and Wine. The secret to success? Gavin leaned back in his leather chair, Manhattan spreading out below him like a kingdom he'd conquered. Never compromise. The moment you start making exceptions, start letting sentiment cloud judgment, start thinking everyone deserves a seat at the table, you've already lost. Excellence is inherently exclusive. It has to be. The journalist ate it up, scribbling notes that would become another fawning profile. Gavin ended the call and opened his laptop, reviewing applications for a new pastry chef position. He scrolled through resumes, dismissing most within seconds. Wrong schools, wrong experience, wrong everything. These people thought passion was enough, thought hard work entitled them to opportunities they hadn't earned. They were wrong. His phone buzzed with a text from an investor confirming dinner next week. Another buzz. His publicist sending over draft copy for a cookbook deal. Everything was aligning perfectly, as it always did when you refused to accept anything less than perfection. Gavin stood and straightened his chef's whites, catching his reflection in the window. Handsome, successful, untouchable. He'd come from nothing, a detail he rarely mentioned anymore, and now he had everything. The right address, the right contacts, the right reputation, and he would destroy anyone who threatened it. The notification chimed on Emma's phone at 6:47 p.m., just as she was leaving her grocery store shift. A delivery request, good payout, Midtown address. She was exhausted, her feet aching from 8 hours standing at a register. But her aunt's nurse was expecting payment tomorrow, and Emma was still $40 short. She accepted the order. The restaurant, some Thai place in Hell's Kitchen, had the food ready when she arrived. Emma clipped the insulated bag to her bike and pedaled toward the address, weaving through evening traffic. Manhattan always felt different at night, all glittering lights and important people rushing toward important places. She was just another shadow passing through. The delivery app directed her to a glass tower, the kind with a lobby that looked like a modern art museum. Emma checked the address twice. The customer had requested back entrance delivery, loading dock access. That made sense. Rich people didn't want delivery cyclists cluttering their pristine lobbies. She found the service entrance around back, rang the bell and waited. The door flew open and a young woman in server's blacks grabbed Emma's arm. "Thank God, where have you been? We're completely destroyed in there." "I'm just dropping off." "No time, come on." The server pulled Emma inside through a concrete corridor that smelled like industrial cleaner and stress. "Marcus said you were coming. We need every hand we can get." "Wait, I think there's been a..." They burst through another door into a gleaming professional kitchen, and Emma's words died in her throat. Stainless steel everywhere, equipment that probably cost more than her entire apartment, chefs moving in synchronized chaos. This wasn't someone's corporate kitchen. This was a restaurant kitchen, and from the look of the plating stations, an expensive one. "Who are you?" A tall man with graying temples and chef's whites stared at Emma like she'd appeared out of thin air. "I'm Emma. I was just delivering food to..." "Marcus!" A woman's voice, sharp with panic. "The investor tasting is in 20 minutes, and we're down a sous chef and 2 line cooks." The man, Marcus apparently, closed his eyes briefly, like he was praying for patience. When he opened them, he looked at Emma again, really looked this time. "Can you cook?" "I used to study culinary." "That's a yes. You know how to prep vegetables?" "Yes, but..." "Then get an apron and start with the mise en place for the fish course. Now." Emma should have left, should have explained the confusion, collected her delivery fee and gotten back on her bike. but the desperation in Marcus's voice reminded her of her mother during dinner rushes at the small bistro where she'd worked. And Emma knew what it felt like to be drowning. Someone thrust an apron at her. She tied it on. The kitchen moved like a living organism, everyone flowing around each other with practiced efficiency. Emma found herself at a prep station with a pile of fennel, a mandate to julienne it paper thin, and no time to think. Her hands remembered the technique before her brain did, the knife moving in steady rhythm, producing perfect translucent strips. She was 2/3 through the fennel when the temperature in the kitchen dropped 20 degrees. Gavin Hale walked in. Emma didn't recognize him immediately. She was focused on her cutting board, on not slicing her fingers, on keeping pace. But she felt the shift in the room, the way every chef straightened slightly, the way conversations died mid-sentence. "Status report," he said, his voice carrying that same cold authority she remembered from cooking shows she'd watched during her culinary school days. Marcus appeared beside him. "We're back on track, chef. The appetizers are going out in 7 minutes. I asked for a status report, not a fairy tale." Gavin's eyes swept the kitchen, cataloging everything, and then they landed on Emma. He went very still. Emma's knife paused mid-cut. Their eyes met across 15 feet of kitchen space, and she watched recognition dawn on his face. Not recognition of her specifically, they'd never met, but recognition of what she represented. The wrong clothes, the wrong posture, the wrong everything. "What?" he said slowly, moving toward her station. "Is that doing in my kitchen?" Marcus stepped forward. "Chef, she's helping with prep. We had a staffing emergency." "I can see what she's doing." Gavin stopped directly across from Emma's cutting board. Up close, he was even more intimidating than on television. Sharp features, sharper eyes, the kind of presence that made you want to apologize for existing. "I asked what she's doing here." Emma found her voice. "I'm Emma. I was making a delivery and there was confusion, and I offered to help because a delivery driver." Gavin's lip curled. "Marcus, we're hosting investors who are considering putting $5 million into this restaurant, and you've staffed my kitchen with delivery drivers." "She's doing fine work, chef. Look at the fennel." Gavin picked up one of Emma's julienne strips, examined it with the intensity of a jeweler studying a diamond for flaws, and dropped it back on the board. "Acceptable," he said, making the word sound like an insult. "Barely." He turned to Marcus. "She finishes this prep and then she leaves through the service door. I don't want her hands touching anything that goes on a plate. Understood?" "Yes, chef." Gavin walked away, already barking orders at other stations. Emma released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands were shaking slightly as she returned to the fennel, but she forced them steady. She had volunteered for this. She could finish the job and leave with her dignity intact. She almost believed it. Emma kept her head down and her knife moving. The fennel pile shrank steadily, each piece uniform and translucent. She'd learned precision at culinary school, back when she still believed she might have a future in kitchens like this one. Now she just wanted to finish and escape. "You." Gavin's voice cut through the kitchen noise. Emma's shoulders tensed, but he wasn't talking to her. "Those scallops look like you beat them with a hammer. Start over." A young chef scrambled to comply, dumping perfectly good scallops into the trash. Emma watched from the corner of her eye, fascinated and horrified by the waste. Those scallops probably cost more than her weekly grocery budget. Marcus appeared at her station. "When you're done with the fennel, we need brunoise on these carrots. Can you handle that?" "Yes, chef." "Don't call me chef. I'm not your chef." But his voice was kind, tired. He glanced over his shoulder where Gavin was inspecting a sauce, then back to Emma. "Just keep your head down and work fast. You're actually helping." Emma nodded and moved to the carrots. Brunoise meant tiny, perfect cubes, the kind of knife work that required focus and patience. Her mother used to say you could tell everything about a cook by their brunoise. Emma's was always exact. She was halfway through when Gavin returned. "Slower than I'd like," he observed, standing too close, invading her space with his expensive cologne and cold judgment. "But I suppose we can't expect miracles from someone who learned to cook from YouTube videos." Emma bit her tongue and kept cutting. Her mother had taught her never to argue with chefs in their own kitchens. Just do the work and let it speak for itself. "Nothing to say?" Gavin leaned against the counter, watching her hands. "No defense of your skills? No proud declarations about your passion for cooking? I'm just here to help, chef. Don't call me chef. You haven't earned the right." He picked up one of her carrot cubes, examined it, set it down. "Where did you say you trained?" "I didn't." "Of course you didn't. Let me guess. Community college? Some weekend course at a strip mall cooking school? Or maybe you just watched enough Food Network to think you understand what we do here." A line cook nearby coughed to cover a laugh. Emma's face burned, but she kept her eyes on her cutting board. "I went to the Culinary Institute," she said quietly, "for 2 semesters. 2 semesters? Gavin's voice dripped with contempt. "So you quit? Couldn't handle the pressure? Realized you didn't have what it takes?" Emma's jaw tightened. She thought of her mother's hospital bills, the funeral costs, her aunt moving in with nothing but medical debt and fading memories. She thought of the impossible choice between dreams and survival. "Something like that," she said. "At least you're honest about your limitations." Gavin straightened up. "That's more than most amateurs manage. They usually bore me with stories about how they would have been great if only life hadn't been so unfair." He walked away, already focused on the next station, the next imperfection to criticize. Emma's hands were shaking again. She forced them still and returned to the carrots. The evening accelerated into controlled chaos. Appetizers went out to the private dining room where investors were gathered. Emma finished the brunoise and was immediately handed herbs to chop, then shallots to mince, then butter to portion. She moved through tasks on autopilot, trying to stay invisible. But Gavin had a talent for finding targets. "Your shoes," he said during a brief lull, his voice loud enough to carry across the kitchen. Emma looked up to find him staring at her feet. "Are those the same shoes you wore walking through subway stations? And God knows what else tonight?" "I didn't plan to be in the kitchen tonight. I was just making excuses, of course." He turned to address the entire line. "This is what I'm talking about. Real professionals arrive prepared. They don't show up in discount sneakers that probably have more bacteria than a petri dish, then touch food that will be served to people who matter." Emma's throat constricted. Around her, chefs avoided eye contact, suddenly very interested in their own stations. "I'm sorry," she managed. "I can wash them if—" "With what?" "The mop water." Gavin shook his head, his expression one of theatrical disappointment. "No, don't bother. Just remember where you are. This isn't some diner where hygiene is optional. This is Aeternum." He said the name like it meant something sacred. Emma nodded mutely and returned to her herbs, her vision blurring slightly. She blinked hard. Crying in a professional kitchen was the worst thing you could do. It proved you were weak, emotional, incapable of handling the heat. She'd watched chefs berate culinary students until they broke, and the ones who cried never recovered their credibility. She would not cry. The evening wore on. Orders flowed. Plates went out. The investors in the other room laughed and drank wine that probably cost more per bottle than Emma's monthly rent. She finished each task Marcus assigned her, working with the steady precision her mother had drilled into her during those precious years when cooking had felt like art instead of survival. Around 9:30, Gavin decided to give the investors a kitchen tour. Emma heard them coming. Expensive shoes on tile, voices bright with alcohol and good food. She tried to fade into the background near the dish station, but there was nowhere to hide. "And this is where the magic happens," Gavin announced, leading a group of men in suits through the kitchen. Every element of every dish is prepared with absolute precision. No shortcuts, no compromises, no room for mediocrity. The investors nodded appreciatively, their eyes glazing over slightly as Gavin explained techniques and philosophies. Emma kept washing the cutting board in her hands, hoping they'd pass by without noticing her. "So of course," Gavin continued, his voice taking on a different tone, "maintaining standards means being selective about who works in this environment. Not everyone has the background, the training, the—" He paused, his eyes landing directly on Emma. The refinement required for this level of cuisine. The investors followed his gaze. Emma felt their eyes on her second-hand clothes, her worn shoes, her complete lack of belonging. "This," Gavin said, gesturing at Emma like she was an exhibit in a museum, "is what happens when we hire people who weren't raised around real culture. They can follow instructions well enough, but they'll never truly understand what we're creating here. The artistry is simply beyond them." One of the investors chuckled. Another nodded knowingly, like Gavin had just explained some profound truth about the restaurant business. Emma stood frozen, the cutting board still in her hands, water dripping onto her shoes. She wanted to disappear, to dissolve into the tile floor, to wake up and discover this entire night had been a nightmare. "But that's why we have standards," Gavin continued, already moving the group toward the next station. "That's why Aeternum will always be exceptional. We don't pretend everyone belongs at this level. We respect the hierarchy of talent." They moved on, leaving Emma standing in a puddle of her own humiliation. Marcus approached quietly once they were gone. "Hey, you okay?" Emma set down the cutting board with shaking hands. "I need to go." Yeah, I think that's probably best." He pulled an envelope from his pocket. "Take this, cash. You saved us tonight, even if—" He glanced toward where Gavin was still pontificating. "Even if nobody's going to admit it." Emma took the envelope without counting it. "Thank you." She untied her apron, hung it on the hook by the door, and walked out through the service corridor. Behind her, the kitchen continued its symphony of heat and precision, already forgetting she'd ever been there. Emma made it as far as the service elevator before she realized she'd left her delivery bag in the kitchen. She closed her eyes, frustration mixing with exhaustion. The bag was her property, not theirs, and it had her phone charger clipped to the inside. She needed it. The elevator doors opened on the main floor instead of the loading dock. Wrong button. Emma stepped out into a corridor of polished marble and soft lighting, completely disoriented. She could hear music now, the gentle clink of silverware on china, voices blending into the sophisticated murmur of wealth at leisure. A sign on the wall directed her toward the service stairs. She followed it, walking quickly, wanting only to grab her bag and leave this place forever. But the corridor opened unexpectedly into a reception area, and beyond that, through massive glass doors, she could see the rooftop terrace. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. String lights overhead, Manhattan's skyline creating a glittering backdrop, tables dressed in white linen, where people who mattered laughed and drank and celebrated their own importance. This was where the investors had moved after their kitchen tour, where the real business of the evening was unfolding over cognac and chocolate. Emma tried to turn back, but a server came through the doors at that moment, nearly colliding with her. "Watch it!" the server snapped, then hurried past with a tray of empty glasses. The collision pushed Emma forward into the reception area, visible through the glass. She saw heads turn, saw confusion register on elegant faces as they tried to place this girl in the wrong clothes in the wrong place, who clearly didn't belong. And then she saw Gavin. He was standing with the investors, gesturing with a wine glass, mid-story. His eyes found her through the glass and something flickered across his face. Annoyance, opportunity. Emma would never be sure. What she knew was that he excused himself from his group and walked deliberately toward the doors. She should have run. Should have turned and fled down the service stairs, pride abandoned in favor of escape. But her feet were rooted to the marble floor, her tired brain too slow to coordinate retreat. Gavin pushed through the glass doors. "Are you lost?" he asked, his voice carrying that same dangerous softness from the kitchen. "I left my bag. I was just—" "Your bag?" He said it like she'd claimed to have left a crown jewel. "You wandered up here past the service area into view of my guests because of a bag. I didn't mean to. The elevator. Gavin's voice was rising now, gaining volume and theatrical energy. Behind him, the investors and other guests were watching through the glass, sensing entertainment. "You stumble into my kitchen in your delivery uniform. You contaminate my prep stations with your discount store hygiene, and now you're crashing an exclusive event because you can't keep track of your belongings?" Emma's face burned. "I'll just go. I'm sorry." But Gavin was turning now, playing to his audience. He pushed open the glass doors wider, so his voice would carry to the terrace. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the interruption," he announced, one arm gesturing back toward Emma like a ringmaster presenting a curiosity. "We seem to have a guest who's confused about where she belongs." Nervous laughter rippled through the crowd. Emma took a step backward, but there was nowhere to go. The terrace guests were standing now, moving closer to the glass, drawn by the spectacle. Gavin turned back to her, his eyes glittering with something that looked almost like pleasure. "Look at yourself," he said, his voice pitched perfectly for the audience. "Look at your clothes, your shoes, the way you carry yourself. Do you honestly think you could ever be part of this world?" Emma couldn't speak. Her throat had closed completely, her chest tight with the kind of humiliation that brands itself into memory forever. "This restaurant represents the pinnacle of culinary achievement," Gavin continued, warming to his performance. "These people have worked their entire lives to earn a seat at tables like this. They've studied, sacrificed, climbed their way up through dedication and excellence. And you think you can just appear in your delivery uniform and— what? Belong?" "I never said I belonged," Emma whispered. "No, but you thought it." Gavin stepped closer, his voice dropping to something almost intimate, almost kind, which made it worse. "I can see it in your eyes. You walked into my kitchen tonight and some part of you wondered what it would be like, what it would feel like to be part of something exceptional instead of whatever small, ordinary life you've built for yourself." Tears were burning behind Emma's eyes now. She fought them desperately. "Let me save you years of disappointment," Gavin said. He turned to face the terrace fully, addressing his audience, while making sure Emma heard every word. "You will never sit at a table like this." His arm swept across the elegant space. "Not even in your dreams." The words detonated in the air between them. Gasps echoed across the terrace. Someone laughed, a sharp bark of cruel amusement. Others joined in, the sound building into a wave that crashed over Emma and left her drowning. She saw their faces through the glass, smiling, entertained. Already turning back to their conversations, the brief interruption concluded. The girl in the wrong clothes properly dismissed. Gavin was still watching her, his expression satisfied, his point made. He'd created a moment these people would remember, a story they'd tell at other exclusive gatherings. The night Gavin Hale destroyed some delivery girl who dared to breathe the same air as her betters. Emma turned and ran. She found the service stairs through vision blurred by tears, her breath coming in gasps that had nothing to do with physical exertion. Down 3 flights, through the loading dock, out into the cool Manhattan night, where delivery trucks idled and the smell of garbage mixed with exhaust. Her bike was still locked where she'd left it. Her delivery bag was gone, probably thrown away or commandeered by Aeternum's staff. She didn't care. She unlocked her bike with shaking hands and pedaled away from the glass tower, away from the restaurant, away from Gavin Hale and his perfect world, where people like her existed only to be humiliated. The tears came fully now, streaming down her face as she rode through midtown traffic. Taxis honked, pedestrians stared. Emma kept pedaling, her legs burning, her chest heaving with sobs she could no longer contain. By the time she reached Queens, Her crying had dissolved into numb exhaustion. She locked her bike outside her building and climbed the 3 flights to her apartment, moving like someone much older than 27. Inside, her aunt was asleep. The medication bottles were lined up on the kitchenette counter. The pull-out couch waited, wrinkled and permanent. Everything was exactly as she'd left it, except Emma herself felt fundamentally altered. She sat on the edge of the couch in the dark, Gavin's words echoing in her skull. "You will never sit at a table like this. Not even in your dreams." He was right. Of course he was right. People didn't leap from discount sneakers to Michelin stars. They didn't transform from delivery cyclists into anyone who mattered. The world had hierarchies for a reason, and Emma had just been reminded exactly where she ranked. She lay down without changing clothes and stared at the water-stained ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled her under into dreamless, empty sleep. Emma woke to her alarm at 5:30 a.m. with Gavin's voice still echoing in her head. She went through her morning routine mechanically: shower, instant coffee, checking her aunt's medications, trying not to think about the rooftop terrace or the laughter or the way she'd cried all the way home. The diner shift passed in a blur of eggs and hash browns and refilling coffee for customers who never looked at her face. The grocery store shift was 4 hours of scanning items and bagging groceries and smiling at people who treated her like part of the machinery. By the time Emma got home that evening, she'd almost convinced herself the night at Aeternum had happened to someone else. Her phone buzzed as she was heating up leftover rice, an email, not a text. Emma almost ignored it. Emails were usually spam or payment reminders, but the subject line caught her eye. Estate of Margaret Dawson, final documentation. Emma's mother had been dead for 3 years. What final documentation could possibly remain? She opened the email. It was from a law firm in Manhattan, the kind with a prestigious address and a letterhead that looked expensive even on a phone screen. Emma had to read the first paragraph twice before the words began making sense. Her mother had established a trust years ago, something Emma had never known about. A small trust, the lawyer explained, intended to support culinary education for students from low-income backgrounds. Margaret Dawson had been passionate about making sure talented people weren't shut out of professional kitchens because of economic barriers. Emma sat down heavily on the couch, the phone trembling in her hand. The trust had been modest at first, but careful investment and a generous donation from an anonymous benefactor had grown it substantially. It was now part of the Hartford Culinary Foundation, a charitable organization that provided scholarships, grants, and partnerships with restaurants committed to mentorship and accessibility. And because Emma was Margaret Dawson's sole heir and had herself been a culinary student, the foundation's board wanted to invite her to join as an advisory member. Emma read the email 3 more times, certain she was misunderstanding something. Her mother had never mentioned a trust. They'd been poor Emma's entire childhood, scraping by on her mother's restaurant wages and whatever odd jobs they could find. How could there have been money for a trust? A second email arrived while she was still processing the first. This one was from the foundation itself, welcoming her to the board and providing details about their current initiatives. They were in the process of evaluating partnership opportunities with high-profile restaurants, seeking establishments that would commit to genuine mentorship programs rather than just using foundation grants for prestige. One of the restaurants under consideration was Aeternum. Emma's breath caught. She scrolled through the email, reading about the potential $5 million partnership that would fund expansion and training programs. The foundation would send representatives to evaluate Aeternum's commitment to mentorship, workplace culture, and accessibility for students from diverse backgrounds. The evaluation team would include several board members, including Emma Dawson. Emma set down her phone and pressed her hands against her face. This couldn't be real. This had to be some kind of mistake, some cosmic joke at her expense. 2 days ago, she'd been humiliated in Gavin Hale's kitchen, thrown out like garbage. told she would never belong. And now she was supposed to walk back in as someone who could influence whether his restaurant received millions of dollars? She picked up the phone again and called the number on the lawyer's email. A receptionist answered, professional and efficient, and transferred her to someone named Patricia Chen, who handled the trust administration. "Ms. Dawson," Patricia said warmly, "I'm so glad you called. I know this must come as quite a surprise." "That's putting it mildly." Emma's voice sounded steadier than she felt. "I don't understand. My mother never told me about any of this." "Your mother established the trust shortly after you were born," Patricia explained. "She contributed what she could over the years, small amounts but consistent. And about 5 years ago, she received a substantial gift from someone who wanted to remain anonymous. Someone who believed in her vision of making culinary careers accessible to people regardless of their background. 5 years ago? Emma's mother had been sick 5 years ago, already beginning the decline that would eventually kill her. She never said anything. She wanted it to be a surprise. She told me once that she hoped you'd discover it after achieving your own success, so you could help others the way she'd wanted to help you." Patricia's voice softened. "I'm sorry it's coming now instead, but Margaret would be proud to know you're joining the foundation board." Emma wasn't sure about that. Her mother had dreamed Emma would be a successful chef by now, not a delivery cyclist working 3 jobs. But the foundation didn't seem to care about her current situation. They cared that she understood what it meant to struggle, to have talent but no resources, to face doors that only opened for people with the right credentials and connections. "The Aeternum evaluation," Emma said carefully. "When is that happening?" "We're scheduling it for next month. The restaurant is very eager for the partnership. Apparently their owner has been quite vocal about his commitment to culinary excellence." Patricia paused. "Have you heard of the place?" Emma closed her eyes and saw Gavin's face, his satisfied smile as he destroyed her in front of his guests. "Yes," she said quietly. "I've heard of it." "Wonderful. Then you'll have valuable perspective during the evaluation. We'll send you more details soon, along with information about your first board meeting next week. It's in Manhattan, near Union Square. Does that work for your schedule?" Emma thought of her 3 jobs, her aunt's medications, her perpetually overdrawn bank account. Manhattan board meetings didn't exactly fit into that reality, but something in her chest was unfurling, something that felt dangerously like hope. "I'll make it work," she said. After the call ended, Emma sat in the dark apartment with her phone in her lap. Through the thin wall, she could hear her aunt's television playing softly, some game show with canned laughter. Outside, sirens wailed in the distance, the eternal soundtrack of Queens at night. Emma opened her email and looked at the foundation's message again. Her name was listed there, right below the chairman and several other board members. Emma Dawson, advisory board member. She had a title now. She had authority, at least in this one specific context. She thought about Gavin standing on that terrace, his voice carrying across the elegant space as he told her she would never sit at a table like his. He'd been so certain, so absolutely confident in his assessment of who she was and what she could ever become. He had no idea who was about to walk back into his restaurant. Emma allowed herself a small smile in the darkness. She didn't know exactly what would happen when the foundation evaluated Aeternum, didn't know if this strange gift from her mother would actually change anything about her life. But for the first time since the rooftop humiliation, she felt something other than shame. She felt possibility. The Hartford Culinary Foundation occupied the 15th floor of a building near Union Square, the kind of office space where everything looked expensive but understated. Emma stood in the lobby the following Tuesday, wearing the only professional outfit she owned. Black slacks and a white blouse she'd bought for culinary school interviews years ago. They still fit, barely, though the fabric was worn thin at the elbows. She took the elevator up, her reflection staring back from polished metal doors. She looked tired. She looked poor. She looked exactly like what she was. someone pretending to belong somewhere she didn't. But when the doors opened and she found the foundation's reception area, the woman at the desk smiled at her like she'd been expected. "Emma Dawson? Welcome. The board is meeting in the conference room. Can I get you coffee or tea?" "Coffee would be great. Thank you." The conference room had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a long table made of dark wood, and 7 other people already seated. They looked up as Emma entered, and she braced herself for the judgment she'd learned to expect. The assessment of her cheap clothes, her wrong everything. Instead, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and kind eyes stood and extended her hand. "Emma, I'm Dorothy Hartford, Foundation Chair. We're so pleased you could join us." Her handshake was firm, warm. "Your mother spoke about you often when we met. She was incredibly proud." "You knew my mother?" "Not as well as I would have liked, but yes, she reached out years ago with her vision for this trust, and we helped her structure it properly. She was a remarkable woman." Emma felt her throat tighten. She was. The others introduced themselves: a restaurant consultant, 2 chefs who ran successful training programs, a food writer, a hospitality lawyer, and someone from a major culinary school. They welcomed Emma like she belonged there, like her perspective mattered. It was disorienting. The meeting focused on current initiatives. The foundation had funded 3 scholarship programs last year, partnered with 2 restaurants on mentorship tracks, and was now considering larger investments. Aeternum represented their most ambitious partnership yet: $5 million that would fund kitchen renovations, salaries for teaching staff, and full scholarships for 20 students from underserved communities. "The question," Dorothy said, looking around the table, "is whether Aeternum shares our values. Gavin Hale's reputation is exceptional in terms of culinary achievement, but we've heard some concerns about workplace culture." The food writer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia, nodded. "I've heard stories. High turnover, hostile environment, staff afraid to speak up. Nothing you can print without lawsuits, but the whispers are consistent." "Which is why the evaluation is crucial," Dorothy said. She turned to Emma. "You'll be part of the team visiting Aeternum. We want fresh eyes, someone who understands both the technical side and what it means to be shut out of opportunities because of background rather than talent." Emma's coffee cup was suddenly very interesting. "I should mention something. I've actually been to Aeternum before." The table went quiet. Dorothy leaned forward. "Recently?" "Last week. There was a staffing emergency, and I helped in the kitchen for a few hours." Emma forced herself to meet Dorothy's eyes. "Gavin Hale was not particularly welcoming. Can you elaborate?" Emma could have downplayed it, could have used diplomatic language and professional distance. But these people were trusting her with their foundation's money and reputation. They deserved honesty. "He humiliated me," she said quietly, "multiple times, in front of his staff, in front of investors. He made it very clear that people like me don't belong in places like his restaurant." Patricia's expression hardened. "What exactly did he say?" Emma repeated Gavin's words, the ones that had carved themselves into her memory. The room remained silent as she spoke, and when she finished, Dorothy exchanged a long look with the hospitality lawyer. "This is exactly the kind of culture we're concerned about," Dorothy said. "Excellence and cruelty are not the same thing, despite what some chefs seem to believe. The question is whether this is who he really is, or whether he was having a bad night," the restaurant consultant offered. "Everyone has moments they regret. A bad night doesn't justify sustained humiliation," Patricia countered. "And if he treated Emma that way in front of witnesses, imagine how he behaves when nobody's watching." Dorothy turned back to Emma. "How do you feel about participating in the evaluation? I understand if this is too personal." Emma thought about running away in tears, about crying on the subway, about lying in her apartment convinced that Gavin was right about her. She thought about her mother, who'd built this trust, believing that talented people deserved chances regardless of where they started. I want to do it, Emma said. If he's genuine about mentorship and accessibility, then that should be obvious during an evaluation. And if he's not, then you should know that before investing millions of dollars. Dorothy smiled. Well said. We'll schedule the evaluation for 2 weeks from now. In the meantime, I'd like you to review our evaluation criteria. You'll have full authority as a board member to ask questions and assess conditions. The meeting continued, moving through other business, but Emma's mind was already at Aeternum. She imagined walking back into that kitchen, not as a delivery cyclist who'd stumbled in by accident, but as someone with authority. Someone Gavin would have to answer to. After the meeting, Dorothy pulled Emma aside in the hallway. Your mother believed the culinary world needed more voices like yours, she said. People who understand that great food doesn't require cruelty, that excellence and humanity can coexist. She was right. Dorothy squeezed Emma's hand. I know this situation is complicated, but you're exactly where you need to be. Emma took the subway home in a daze. The foundation was sending her a stipend for her board participation, not enough to quit her jobs, but enough to reduce her hours and attend meetings without going deeper into debt. They were treating her like a professional, like someone whose opinion mattered. Over the next 2 weeks, Emma immersed herself in foundation materials. She read evaluation rubrics, studied successful mentorship programs, learned what separated genuine commitment from performative diversity. She attended a second board meeting where they refined questions for the Aeternum visit, and slowly, something shifted inside her. She started carrying herself differently, started speaking with more confidence, started believing that maybe, just maybe, she did belong in rooms where important decisions were made. Her aunt noticed. You look different, she said one evening. Taller somehow. Emma smiled. I feel different. She bought a new outfit for the Aeternum evaluation. Still modest, still within her budget, but professional and well-fitted. She practiced questions in front of the bathroom mirror. She prepared herself for seeing Gavin again, for the moment when he'd realized she wasn't some powerless girl he could dismiss. The night before the evaluation, Emma stood in her tiny kitchen and cooked the way her mother had taught her, with care, with intention, with the understanding that food was about more than technique or prestige or Michelin stars. It was about feeding people, about bringing comfort and joy, about creating something meaningful from raw ingredients and human effort. Gavin had forgotten that, or maybe he'd never learned it in the first place. Emma plated her simple meal, pasta with vegetables from the discount bin, elevated by proper technique and genuine care, and ate it slowly, tasting every element. Tomorrow she would walk back into Aeternum, but this time she wouldn't be running away. The evaluation team arrived at Aeternum at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday before lunch service began. Emma walked through the front entrance this time, not the loading dock, flanked by Dorothy and Patricia. The hostess greeted them with professional warmth, clearly briefed on the importance of this visit. Mr. Hale is expecting you. Please, follow me. They were led through the main dining room, currently empty but set for service, every table perfect. Emma's heels clicked against the marble floor, a sound completely different from the squeak of her old sneakers. She kept her expression neutral, her posture confident, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. The hostess opened the door to a private dining area where Gavin waited with Marcus and 2 other staff members. He was impeccable as always, chef's whites pressed to perfection, his smile practiced and welcoming. Dorothy, wonderful to see you again, he said, moving forward with his hand extended. And Patricia, thank you for coming. Then his eyes landed on Emma. The smile froze on his face. Just for a second, maybe less, but Emma saw it. The recognition, the confusion, the rapid calculation happening behind those sharp eyes as he tried to reconcile the girl he'd destroyed with the woman standing in his restaurant wearing professional clothes and foundation credentials. And this is Emma Dawson, Dorothy said smoothly, one of our newest board members. Emma has particular expertise in accessibility and mentorship from a student perspective. Gavin's hand was still extended, trapped by social convention. Emma took it, her grip firm, her expression pleasant. "Mr. Hale," she said, "thank you for having us." His hand was cold, or maybe hers was. They shook briefly, and Emma released him first, already turning her attention to Marcus, who looked nearly as shocked as his boss. "Marcus, good to see you again," Emma said. "Miss Dawson." Marcus recovered faster than Gavin, his professional mask sliding back into place. "Welcome back." Gavin was still staring at her, struggling to process. Emma could see him trying to decide whether to acknowledge their previous encounter or pretend it had never happened. The calculation playing across his face was almost satisfying to watch. "Shall we begin?" Dorothy suggested, pulling out a tablet. "We'd love to tour the facilities and discuss your vision for the mentorship program." Gavin blinked and found his voice. "Of course, absolutely. I've prepared a full presentation on our commitment to culinary education." He led them to the private dining area, where a sleek presentation waited on a large screen. Emma sat between Dorothy and Patricia, her notebook open, her pen ready. Across the table, Gavin kept glancing at her, unable to fully focus on his own presentation. "Aeternum has always been about excellence," he began, his voice carrying that same authority Emma remembered. "But excellence means nothing if it's not shared, if it's not passed forward to the next generation." Patricia made a note. Emma kept her expression neutral. "We envision a comprehensive training program," Gavin continued, clicking to the next slide. 20 students per year, fully funded, working alongside our Michelin-starred team. They'll learn not just technique, but the philosophy of true culinary artistry." "And what happens if a student struggles?" Emma asked, her voice calm and professional. "If they need extra time to master techniques, or if they come from backgrounds without prior kitchen experience?" Gavin's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We maintain high standards, obviously, but we're committed to patient mentorship." "Patient mentorship," Emma repeated, writing it down. "Can you give us an example of how you've demonstrated patience with struggling staff in the past?" The question hung in the air. Marcus shifted in his seat. Gavin's smile remained fixed, but Emma saw something flicker in his eyes. Memory, recognition of the trap. "Every teaching moment is different," he said carefully. "The key is maintaining excellence while allowing room for growth." "That's quite diplomatic," Patricia observed. "But we're interested in specifics. How do you handle mistakes during service? How do you communicate with staff who aren't meeting expectations?" "Firmly, but fairly," Gavin said. "Professional kitchens require discipline. There's a difference between discipline and cruelty," Emma said quietly. "We've heard concerns about workplace culture here, high turnover, staff afraid to ask questions. That's not an environment where genuine learning happens." Gavin's eyes locked onto hers, and for a moment the professional mask slipped. She saw anger there, barely controlled, mixed with something that might have been fear. "I don't know where you've heard these things," he said, his voice tight, "but I can assure you we run a professional, respectful kitchen." "I'm sure you do," Dorothy interjected smoothly, "which is why we'd like to tour the kitchen and speak with some of your staff. Anonymous interviews, of course. We found that's the best way to understand actual culture versus stated policies." Gavin stood abruptly. "Of course, right this way." The kitchen tour was tense. Staff members carefully answered questions, their responses polished and safe. Emma watched them exchange glances with Gavin, saw the way they measured every word. This wasn't a kitchen where people spoke freely. This was a kitchen where people survived. Dorothy noticed too. Emma could tell from the way the foundation chair's questions became more pointed, her observations more detailed. They ended in Gavin's office, a sleek space overlooking the dining room. Gavin leaned against his desk, arms crossed, his earlier charm abandoned. "I think we both know what this is really about," he said, looking directly at Emma. Dorothy raised an eyebrow. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Ms. Dawson and I have met before," Gavin said. "Briefly. There was some confusion, some miscommunication. I think she may be bringing personal feelings into what should be a professional evaluation." Emma felt Patricia and Dorothy's attention shift to her. She met Gavin's gaze steadily. "You're right that we've met," she said. "And you're right that it was memorable. You told me I would never sit at a table like yours, that people like me don't belong in places like this." Gavin's face paled slightly. "You humiliated me in front of your staff and your investors," Emma continued, her voice calm but clear. "You judged me based on my clothes and my background, not my skills or my potential. And now you want $5 million to run a mentorship program for students from disadvantaged backgrounds." She closed her notebook and stood. "The question isn't whether I'm being unfair to you, Mr. Hale. The question is whether you're capable of treating students with the respect and patience they deserve, regardless of where they come from. Based on what I've seen today, and what I experienced firsthand, I have serious doubts." Dorothy stood as well, her expression professional but cold. "We'll complete our evaluation and present findings to the full board next week. Thank you for your time, Mr. Hale." They left him standing in his office, his empire suddenly fragile, his confidence shaken. In the elevator down, Dorothy turned to Emma. "You handled that beautifully." "I just told the truth," Emma said. "That's exactly what we needed." Patricia was already typing notes on her phone. "This is a clear case of stated values versus demonstrated behavior. No way we're approving this partnership." Emma looked at her reflection in the elevator's polished doors. She looked different now, stronger, like someone who belonged exactly where she was standing. When they reached the lobby, sunlight streaming through glass doors, Emma allowed herself a small smile. She had walked back into Gavin's world. And this time, she was the one with power. 3 days after the evaluation, Emma received an elegantly embossed invitation delivered by messenger to her apartment. The Hartford Culinary Foundation and their evaluation team were cordially invited to a special gala dinner at Aeternum, where Gavin Hale would personally demonstrate his commitment to culinary mentorship and accessibility. Emma stared at the heavy cardstock, recognizing the move for what it was. Gavin was making a last desperate play, trying to overwhelm them with spectacle and performance. Dorothy called an hour later. "Did you get the invitation?" "Just now. He's panicking." "Agreed, but we should attend. If he's willing to put on a public display of his mentorship philosophy, we should witness it." Dorothy paused. "Are you comfortable with that?" Emma thought about it. Walking back into Aeternum again, this time for an event designed to manipulate the Foundation's opinion. It should have felt like walking into a trap. Instead, it felt like an opportunity. "I'm comfortable," Emma said. "Let's see what he does." The gala was scheduled for Saturday evening, black tie optional. Emma used part of her foundation stipend to rent a dress, nothing extravagant but elegant and well-fitted, the kind of dress that made her feel confident rather than costumed. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror the night of the event, barely recognizing herself. "You look like someone important," her aunt said from the doorway, smiling. "I'm trying to feel like someone important," Emma admitted. "You are important. You always have been. Now other people are finally noticing." The car service Dorothy had arranged picked Emma up at 7. She rode into Manhattan, watching the city lights blur past, her stomach tight with anticipation. When they arrived at Aeternum, the restaurant had been transformed. Photographers lined the entrance. A red carpet led to the elevators. Gavin had invited press, food critics, influencers, and every donor the foundation had ever worked with. This wasn't just a dinner, this was a production. Dorothy and Patricia met Emma in the lobby, both dressed impeccably. "He's pulling out all the stops," Patricia observed. "This feels desperate." "It is desperate," Dorothy said. "Which means we need to be careful. Desperate people make dangerous mistakes." They rode the elevator to the rooftop level, where the same terrace that had witnessed Emma's humiliation had been set for the gala. String lights overhead, Manhattan's skyline glittering, tables dressed in silver and white. Everything was beautiful, calculated, designed to impress. Gavin stood near the entrance greeting guests, flanked by Marcus and his sous chefs. He wore a designer suit instead of chef's whites, perfectly tailored, his smile bright and practiced. When he saw the foundation team, his smile widened. "Dorothy, Patricia, Ms. Dawson, welcome." He air-kissed Dorothy's cheeks in the European fashion, shook Patricia's hand, then turned to Emma. "I'm particularly glad you're here, Ms. Dawson. I've prepared something special." Emma's internal alarm system activated. "Oh? You'll see. Please, enjoy champagne while we prepare the main event." They mingled with other guests, foundation donors who praised Gavin's restaurant and expressed enthusiasm about the potential partnership, food critics who spoke reverently about Aeternum's innovations. Emma smiled and nodded and felt increasingly uneasy. Finally, Gavin called for everyone's attention. The crowd gathered near a specially constructed demonstration kitchen in the center of the terrace, complete with professional equipment and cameras positioned to capture every angle. "Thank you all for coming tonight," Gavin began, his voice carrying across the space. "The Hartford Foundation partnership represents an incredible opportunity to share culinary excellence with deserving students. To demonstrate my commitment, I've invited someone very special to join me for a cooking demonstration." He turned and looked directly at Emma. Ms. Emma Dawson, one of the Foundation's newest board members, has a culinary background herself. I thought it would be meaningful to cook alongside her tonight to show that Aeternum welcomes talent regardless of background. Emma's blood went cold. Around her, guests applauded politely. Dorothy's hand found her arm, a silent question. "Are you okay?" Emma could refuse, could cite professional boundaries or simple unwillingness. But every eye in the crowd was on her now, and refusing would look like fear. Gavin knew it. This was his trap, his way of regaining control. He was betting she would fail, betting he could expose her as a fraud in front of everyone who mattered. Emma lifted her chin and walked toward the demonstration kitchen. "I'd be happy to," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. Gavin's smile was sharp as a blade. "Wonderful. We'll prepare a classic dish, seared scallops with beurre blanc and microgreens. Simple enough that technique becomes everything." He was choosing something that required precision, timing, perfect execution. Something where any mistake would be obvious to the crowd of food experts watching. They took their positions at the demonstration kitchen. Gavin moved with practiced showmanship, explaining each step to the audience while his hands worked efficiently. His scallops were perfect, golden crust, translucent center, plated with artistic flair. "Your turn, Ms. Dawson," he said, stepping back with a gesture that said, "The stage is yours." Emma looked at the ingredients before her. Scallops, butter, wine, shallots, herbs. She thought about her mother teaching her to sear fish in their tiny apartment kitchen, about late nights practicing techniques she couldn't afford to learn in school, about every meal she'd cooked with cheap ingredients and careful attention. She began to work. Her hands moved without hesitation, patting the scallops dry, heating the pan to exactly the right temperature. She heard her mother's voice. "Listen to the pan. It will tell you when it's ready." The butter foamed. The scallops hit the surface with a perfect sizzle. Emma didn't rush, didn't perform. She simply cooked the way she'd been taught, with patience, precision, and respect for the ingredients. The crowd had gone quiet, watching. Cameras captured every movement. Gavin stood to the side, his expression unreadable. Emma flipped the scallops. Perfect golden crust. She began the beurre blanc, whisking butter into wine reduction, feeling the sauce come together through the resistance of the whisk. The microgreens went on last, arranged with simple elegance. She plated the dish and stepped back. For a moment, No one spoke. Then someone in the crowd began to clap. Others joined. The applause built until it filled the terrace. "Remarkable," someone whispered. "Where did she train? That technique is exquisite." A food critic Emma recognized from television stepped forward to taste both dishes. She tried Gavin's first, nodding appreciatively, then Emma's. Her eyes widened. "This is incredible," she said. "The scallops are perfectly cooked, but more than that, there's something in this dish. Heart, soul. You can taste the care." Other guests moved forward to sample. Cameras clicked. Whispered conversations spread through the crowd. Emma watched Gavin's face cycle through emotions, surprise, disbelief, and finally, barely suppressed rage. He'd tried to humiliate her again, and instead, she'd shown everyone exactly what she was capable of. Dorothy appeared at Emma's side, her smile warm and proud. That was extraordinary. Patricia was already talking to donors, gesturing toward Emma. The narrative was shifting in real time. This wasn't a girl who'd stumbled into Aeternum by accident. This was a talented chef who'd been misjudged, dismissed, pushed aside by someone who valued pedigree over potential. Gavin tried to recover, tried to steer conversation back to his vision for the mentorship program, but the moment had slipped away from him. The guests wanted to talk to Emma, wanted to know her story, wanted to understand how someone with her skills had ended up working delivery jobs instead of running her own kitchen. Emma answered their questions honestly. She spoke about her mother, about dropping out of school, about the economic realities that made culinary careers inaccessible to talented people without family wealth. She spoke about what real mentorship looked like: patience, respect, seeing potential instead of pedigree. And with every word, she dismantled Gavin's carefully constructed image. By the end of the evening, Emma stood on the same terrace where she'd been destroyed 2 weeks earlier, surrounded by people who actually saw her, who recognized her talent, who understood that she belonged exactly where she was standing. Gavin watched from across the crowd, his perfect gala turned into Emma's triumph, his trap transformed into her vindication. Their eyes met across the distance. Emma didn't smile, didn't gloat. She simply held his gaze until he looked away first. The guests lingered long after the demonstration ended, clustering around Emma with questions and congratulations. A chef who ran a successful bistro in Brooklyn asked for her contact information. A food writer wanted to profile her story. 3 different donors offered to connect her with culinary opportunities. Emma handled it all with grace that surprised even herself, answering questions while remaining humble, deflecting excessive praise while accepting genuine recognition. She felt Dorothy watching her approvingly from across the terrace, saw Patricia taking notes on her phone, probably already drafting the foundation's evaluation report. Gavin had retreated to the edges of his own party, his smile growing more strained with each passing minute. Marcus hovered nearby, whispering updates that seemed to make Gavin's expression darker. Around 10 o'clock, Dorothy gathered the foundation team near the bar. "I think we've seen enough," she said quietly. "This evening has been very illuminating." "He tried to set her up," Patricia observed, keeping her voice low, "tried to expose her as a fraud, and instead, she showed everyone what genuine talent looks like when it's given a chance." Dorothy nodded. "Which tells us everything we need to know about his mentorship philosophy. He doesn't want to nurture talent. He wants to gatekeep it, to maintain his position at the top of the hierarchy." Emma glanced across the terrace where Gavin was speaking with a group of investors, his body language tense. "What happens now?" "Now we make our recommendation to the board," Dorothy said. "But I think you know what that recommendation will be." They were preparing to leave when Gavin approached, his publicist trailing behind him like a worried shadow. "Leaving so soon?" His voice was tight, controlled. "I hoped we could discuss the evaluation further. Perhaps in my office?" Dorothy checked her watch. "It's getting late, Mr. Hale. I think we have all the information we need." Just a few minutes, Gavin pressed. Please, there are details about the mentorship program I didn't get to cover. Something in his voice made Emma pause. Not quite desperation, but close. The sound of someone watching their empire crack. Dorothy exchanged a glance with Patricia, then nodded. 10 minutes. They followed Gavin to his office, the publicist wisely staying behind. The sleek space felt smaller with 5 people in it, the city lights through the window somehow less impressive than before. Gavin closed the door and turned to face them, his mask finally slipping. I know what you're going to recommend, he said bluntly. I know tonight didn't go the way I planned. Mr. Hale, Dorothy began, but he held up a hand. Let me finish, please. He looked directly at Emma. You were right. About everything. The way I treated you was inexcusable, not just unprofessional, but cruel. And it wasn't an isolated incident. It's how I've run this kitchen, this restaurant, for years. Emma said nothing, waiting. I convinced myself it was about standards, Gavin continued, his voice raw in a way she'd never heard. That cruelty was necessary for excellence. That being feared was the same as being respected. I watched chefs I admired treat their staff like garbage, and I thought that was the price of Michelin stars. It's not, Emma said quietly. I know that now. Gavin ran a hand through his hair, destroying his perfect styling. Watching you cook tonight, seeing the way people responded to you, understanding that you have more genuine talent in your little finger than I've shown in years of chasing accolades, it made something very clear. He moved to the window, looking out at the city. I don't deserve the foundation's money. I don't deserve to mentor anyone. And honestly, I'm not sure I deserve this restaurant anymore. The admission hung in the air, shocking in its honesty. Patricia broke the silence. So what are you going to do about it? Gavin turned back to them. I don't know, but I know I can't keep doing this. Can't keep treating people like they're disposable just because they don't fit my narrow definition of belonging. Dorothy studied him carefully. Awareness is a start, Mr. Hale, but awareness without action is meaningless. I know. The Foundation's decision is made, Dorothy continued. We won't be approving the partnership. Your workplace culture is incompatible with our values, and we have no confidence that you could create a safe, supportive environment for students. Gavin nodded, accepting the verdict without argument. But, Dorothy added, glancing at Emma, if you're serious about change, perhaps you should start by making amends to the people you've harmed, starting with the woman standing in this office. Gavin looked at Emma, really looked at her, and for the first time she saw something genuine in his expression. Shame, regret, the beginning of understanding. I'm sorry, he said, for what I said on that terrace, for how I treated you in the kitchen, for making you feel like you didn't belong when the truth is, you belong in places like this far more than I do. Emma felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness, that would take time if it came at all, but a loosening of the anger she'd been carrying. I appreciate that, she said, but I'm not the only person you owe an apology to. Your staff, everyone you've belittled or humiliated over the years. If you're serious about change, that's where you need to start. You're right. Gavin moved to his desk, opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. This was going to be a check for the foundation, part of my contribution to the partnership. Obviously, that's not happening now, but I'd like you to have it. For whatever you need, culinary school, starting your own place, anything. He held out the envelope. Emma didn't take it. I don't want your money, she said. I want you to be better, to treat people with the respect they deserve. That's worth more than any check. Gavin set the envelope on the desk, nodding slowly. They left him standing in his office, the envelope untouched, the city lights casting long shadows across expensive furniture. In the elevator, no one spoke until they reached the lobby. That was unexpected, Patricia finally said. People can change, Dorothy offered. Whether they actually do is another question. Emma stepped out into the Manhattan night, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. She'd walked into Gavin's trap and emerged stronger. She'd cooked in front of critics and donors and proven she belonged. She'd faced the man who'd humiliated her and shown him exactly what he'd tried to destroy. Dorothy's car was waiting. "Can we drop you home?" "Actually," Emma said, surprising herself, "I think I'd like to walk for a bit. Clear my head." "Of course. We'll talk soon about next steps. The board is very impressed with you, Emma. I think your role with the foundation is just beginning." Emma watched the car pull away, then started walking downtown. The streets were alive with Saturday night energy, people laughing, music spilling from restaurants, the eternal pulse of a city that never stopped moving. She thought about her mother, who'd created a trust believing that talent deserved opportunities, who'd dreamed of a culinary world where background didn't determine destiny, who'd seen something in Emma worth investing in, even when she couldn't be there to see it bloom. Emma pulled out her phone and took a photo of the Manhattan skyline, the lights reflecting off glass towers, the city that had seemed so far above her just weeks ago. She'd sat at Gavin's table. She'd proved she belonged, and she was just getting started. The Hartford Culinary Foundation held their board meeting the following Thursday in the same conference room where Emma had first sat as a member. She arrived early, reviewing her notes from the Aeternum evaluation, making sure every observation was documented and clear. The other board members filtered in, greeting her warmly. Over the past weeks, Emma had earned their respect not through performance or politics, but through genuine insight and unwavering honesty. They trusted her perspective because she'd lived the struggles their foundation aimed to address. Dorothy called the meeting to order at exactly 9 o'clock. "Today we'll finalize our decision regarding the Aeternum partnership," she began, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "This represents our largest potential investment to date, $5 million that could fund comprehensive mentorship programming, but only if we're confident the partner organization shares our values." She turned to Patricia. "Let's start with the evaluation report." Patricia projected her findings on the screen. Staff turnover rates at Aeternum were 3 times the industry average. Anonymous interviews revealed a culture of fear where asking questions was treated as incompetence. Former employees described verbal abuse, public humiliation, and an environment where technical excellence was demanded, but emotional safety was non-existent. "The physical facilities are extraordinary," Patricia continued. "The culinary techniques are world-class, but you cannot mentor vulnerable students in a hostile environment. The damage would outweigh any technical knowledge they might gain." Murmurs of agreement around the table. Dorothy looked at Emma. "You experienced this culture firsthand. What's your assessment?" Emma took a breath. She could have been vindictive, could have let her personal humiliation color her professional judgment. But the foundation deserved better than that. "Gavin Hale is an exceptionally talented chef," she said carefully. "His technical skills are undeniable, but talent and mentorship are different things. Mentorship requires patience, empathy, the ability to see potential in people who don't look like you or come from where you came from." She clicked to the next slide, showing photos from the gala demonstration. "At the gala, Mr. Hale tried to humiliate me again. He set up a cooking demonstration designed to expose me as a fraud in front of donors and critics. When that backfired, when I showed I could cook at his level, he had a moment of genuine reflection, maybe even genuine regret." "Does that change your recommendation?" the hospitality lawyer asked. "No," Emma said firmly, "because awareness isn't enough. He's had years to treat people with respect and chose cruelty instead. One moment of clarity doesn't undo a pattern of behavior, and $5 million of foundation money shouldn't be a reward for finally recognizing basic human decency." The room fell silent. Emma continued, "But more importantly, this isn't about punishing Gavin Hale. It's about investing in mentorship that actually works. Students from disadvantaged backgrounds need environments where they feel safe to learn, to make mistakes, to ask questions without fear of being destroyed. Aeternum can't provide that environment, not as it currently exists. Dorothy nodded slowly. Well said. Does anyone disagree with Emma's assessment? The board members looked at each other. No one spoke. Then I'll call for a formal vote, Dorothy said. All in favor of declining the Aeternum partnership? Every hand went up. The motion passes unanimously. Dorothy made a note in her tablet. Patricia, please draft the formal notification to Mr. Hale. Professional, clear, with specific reasons for our decision. Already done, Patricia said, pulling up a document. I'll send it this afternoon. Good. Now on to more positive business. Dorothy smiled around the table. We need to decide where to invest these funds instead. I'd like to propose an alternative. She clicked to a new presentation, and Emma's breath caught. The screen showed a proposal for a new culinary training center in Queens, focused on students from low-income backgrounds. Comprehensive programming, including technical training, business skills, financial literacy, and job placement. A teaching kitchen where students could learn in a supportive environment. And at the heart of it, a restaurant where they could gain real experience while serving their own communities. We've been working on this concept for months, Dorothy explained. But we needed the right person to lead it. Someone who understands both the technical demands of professional cooking and the real barriers facing disadvantaged students. Someone who's lived those barriers and overcome them. She turned to Emma. We'd like you to direct the program. Full salary, benefits, and complete authority over curriculum and culture. You'd hire staff, design the training, and run the restaurant. The foundation would provide the $5 million that was earmarked for Aeternum, plus additional funding as needed. Emma stared at the screen, unable to process what she was hearing. You want me to run this? We want you to build this, Dorothy corrected. This would be your vision, your program. The foundation would provide resources and oversight, but the leadership would be entirely yours. Patricia leaned forward. We've already scouted locations. There's a vacant restaurant space in Astoria near your neighborhood. Perfect size, needs renovation, but the bones are good. We could have it operational in 6 months. Emma's hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against the table. I don't have experience running a program like this. I never even finished culinary school. You have something better than credentials, the restaurant consultant said. You have authenticity. You understand these students because you are these students. And after watching you at that gala, after seeing how you handled Gavin Hale with grace and strength, I have no doubt you can lead this program. Around the table, board members nodded agreement. Dorothy placed a folder in front of Emma. This is the full proposal. Take it home, read it carefully, think about what you'd want to change or add. We're not expecting an answer today, but we are expecting a yes eventually, Patricia added with a smile. Because you're perfect for this, and I think you know it. The meeting continued with other business, but Emma barely heard it. She kept staring at the folder, at the proposal that would transform her life completely. No more juggling 3 jobs. No more delivery shifts. No more wondering if she'd ever get to use her culinary training for anything meaningful. This was everything her mother had dreamed for her, and more. After the meeting, Emma stood at the conference room window looking out at the city. Dorothy joined her, silent for a moment. Your mother would be very proud, she said quietly. Emma felt tears burning behind her eyes. She created this opportunity without even knowing it. She created the trust. You created this opportunity by being exactly who you are, talented, resilient, and unwilling to let cruelty define you. Dorothy squeezed Emma's shoulder. The foundation's money funded a lot of things over the years, but I think this might be the most important investment we've ever made. Emma took the folder home on the subway, holding it carefully like it might disappear. In her tiny apartment, she spread the proposal across the kitchen counter and read every page twice. The budget was substantial. The timeline was ambitious. The vision was everything she'd never dared to dream. Her aunt shuffled out of the bedroom. What's all this? Emma looked up, her face streaked with tears she didn't remember shedding. It's a job offer, to run a culinary training program, to open a restaurant, to actually do what Mom always wanted me to do. Her aunt read over her shoulder, her eyes widening. When she finished, she wrapped Emma in a fierce hug. When do you start? Emma laughed through her tears. I haven't said yes yet. Emma Rose Dawson, if you don't say yes to this, I'm going to be very disappointed in you. That night, Emma sat on her pull-out couch and composed an email to Dorothy. 3 drafts, 4 rewrites, finally settling on something simple and true. I'm honored and terrified and completely committed. Yes, absolutely yes. When do we start? She hit send before she could second-guess herself. The response came back in under a minute. Welcome aboard, Director Dawson. Let's change some lives. Emma closed her laptop and looked around her cramped apartment. Soon she'd be able to afford something bigger, something where her aunt could have proper space. But more than that, she'd be creating opportunities for people just like her, people with talent and determination, but no clear path forward. People who'd been told they would never sit at certain tables. She was going to build them their own table. Emma spent the next week in meetings with architects, contractors, and foundation advisors, planning every detail of the new culinary center. The vacant restaurant space in Astoria was perfect, large enough for a teaching kitchen and a 40-seat dining room, with good bones and lots of natural light. She walked through it 3 times, imagining students at the stations, families at the tables, the smell of food cooked with care and purpose. She was leaving the space after her 3rd visit when her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. This is Gavin Hale. I need to speak with you, please. Emma stared at the message for a long moment. She could ignore it, block the number, move forward with her life without looking back. But something in the word please stopped her. Gavin Hale didn't strike her as someone who said please very often. She typed back, when and where? His response was immediate. Coffee tomorrow morning? I'll come to Queens if that's easier for you. The offer to leave Manhattan, to come to her neighborhood instead of demanding she travel to his territory, was significant. Emma recognized it as what it was, a gesture of respect, or at least an attempt at one. Sunrise Cafe on Steinway Street, 9 a.m. I'll be there. Emma arrived 15 minutes early the next morning, claiming a table near the back where they could talk privately. The cafe was a neighborhood fixture, the kind of place where eggs came with toast and coffee refills were automatic, nothing like the restaurants Gavin normally inhabited. He arrived exactly on time, looking strangely out of place in his expensive casual wear, designer jeans and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than the cafe's monthly rent. Several regulars glanced at him curiously as he made his way to Emma's table. Thank you for meeting me, he said, sitting across from her. A waitress appeared with coffee. Gavin looked at the thick ceramic mug like he'd never seen one before, probably accustomed to espresso in delicate cups. He took a sip and didn't comment. What did you want to talk about? Emma asked. Gavin set down his mug carefully. I received the Foundation's decision yesterday. Official letter declining the partnership, listing specific reasons, workplace culture, pattern of hostile behavior, inability to provide safe learning environment. He looked up at her. All accurate? Yes, Emma said simply. Aeternum is struggling. After the gala, after word got out about why the Foundation rejected us, 3 major investors pulled their backing. Food critics are reassessing their reviews. Staff members are leaving. He spoke without emotion, just stating facts. The restaurant will probably close within 6 months. Emma wasn't sure what she was supposed to say to that. She felt no satisfaction in Aeternum's collapse, but no guilt either. I'm sorry that's happening, she said, and meant it. But that's not my fault. No, it's mine. Gavin leaned back in his chair, looking tired in a way his expensive clothes couldn't hide. I spent 15 years building an empire based on fear and cruelty. I convinced myself that was strength, that being respected meant being feared. I was wrong. Why are you telling me this? Because I wanted you to know that I'm selling Aeternum. The building, the name, everything. I'm done with that version of myself. Emma studied him carefully. What will you do? I don't know yet. Maybe nothing for a while. Maybe work in someone else's kitchen and remember what it's like to not be in charge. He smiled without humor. Maybe finally learn how to be a decent human being. That's a good start, Emma said quietly. Gavin pulled an envelope from his jacket pocket, the same envelope he'd tried to give her in his office. I know you said you didn't want my money, but this isn't about assuaging my guilt. It's about making amends in the only concrete way I can. He slid the envelope across the table. It's a check for $50,000, not for you personally, but for your program, for scholarships, equipment, whatever students need, no strings attached. The foundation doesn't even have to acknowledge where it came from if that makes it easier. Emma looked at the envelope but didn't touch it. Why? Because watching you cook at that gala showed me something I'd forgotten. Food isn't about dominance or hierarchy, or proving you're better than everyone else. It's about connection, about nurturing, about creating something meaningful from raw ingredients and care. He paused. Your mother understood that. You understand that. I forgot it somewhere along the way, and it cost me everything that actually mattered. Emma picked up the envelope, feeling its weight. If I accept this, it's not forgiveness, it's not reconciliation, it's just practical funding for students who need it. I understand. And it doesn't change what happened, what you did to me and probably to dozens of other people over the years. I know. Gavin met her eyes steadily. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. I'm just trying to do one thing right before I disappear. They sat in silence for a moment, the cafe's morning noise filling the space between them, the clink of dishes, the murmur of conversations, the hiss of the espresso machine. I meant what I said in my office, Gavin finally continued, about you belonging in places like Aeternum more than I do. You have something I never had, genuine passion for feeding people, not for collecting accolades. That's what makes a real chef. Emma felt something shift in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, but something softer than anger. Recognition that people could be terrible and still be human. That cruelty could coexist with capacity for change. Tables don't make people important, Gavin, she said, echoing her words from his office. Respect does. How we treat people when they can't do anything for us, that's what defines us. I'm beginning to understand that. He stood, leaving money on the table for the coffee. Good luck with your program. Those students are fortunate to have you. Emma watched him walk toward the door. This man who'd once seemed untouchable, now diminished and uncertain. At the door, he paused and turned back. For what it's worth, he said, I hope someday I can cook in a kitchen where people feel safe, where talent matters more than pedigree. Maybe I'll apply to your program in a few years, start over from scratch. He said it with a half smile, self-deprecating, acknowledging the absurdity and maybe the possibility. Maybe you should, Emma said. After he left, Emma sat alone with her coffee and the envelope. She opened it carefully. The check was exactly what he'd said, $50,000 made out to the Hartford Culinary Foundation, with a memo line reading, for student scholarships. She pulled out her phone and called Dorothy. I just met with Gavin Hale, she said when the foundation chair answered. He wants to donate $50,000 to the program, no strings attached, completely anonymous if we prefer. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. What do you think? I think people can be terrible and still try to be better. I think his money is the same as anyone else's money, and it will help students who need it. And I think... Emma paused, surprised by her own words. I think my mother would have accepted it. She believed in second chances. Then we'll accept it, Dorothy said. And Emma, your mother was a wise woman, so are you. Emma ended the call and finished her coffee, watching morning sunlight stream through the cafe windows. Gavin Hale had tried to destroy her, had humiliated her, had represented everything wrong with the culinary world's obsession with hierarchy and cruelty. But she'd survived. More than survived, she transformed his attempted destruction into her own opportunity, his rejection into her validation. And now, impossibly, he'd contributed to the very program that would dismantle the kind of toxic culture he'd built. Emma left the cafe and walked toward the subway, the check secure in her bag, the morning bright and full of possibility. She had a culinary center to build, students to recruit, a vision to bring to life. Gavin Hale's table was crumbling, but Emma was building something better. 6 months later, Emma stood in front of Hearthlight Culinary Center, watching workers hang the sign above the entrance. The name had come to her late one night while reviewing plans, Hearthlight, representing both the warmth of home cooking and the illumination of opportunity. Her mother would have loved it. The renovation had transformed the space completely. Large windows flooded the teaching kitchen with natural light. Professional equipment lined the walls, donated by suppliers who'd heard about the program and wanted to support it. The dining room seated 40, with tables made from reclaimed wood and mismatched chairs that somehow worked together perfectly, intentionally welcoming rather than intimidatingly uniform. "It's beautiful," Dorothy said, appearing beside Emma on the sidewalk. "Even better than the renderings. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and discover this was all a dream," Emma admitted. "It's real. And in 2 weeks you'll have 20 students walking through that door ready to learn." The scholarship applications had overwhelmed them, over 300 people applying for 20 spots. Emma had read every single one, staying up late into the night learning about talented people stuck in the same impossible situations she'd faced. Single parents working multiple jobs, recent immigrants with culinary skills but no credentials, young people aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. She'd chosen 20 students who reminded her of herself, people with raw talent, fierce determination, and lives that had given them every reason to give up, but they hadn't. Patricia joined them, holding her phone up. "You need to see this." The screen showed a news article from that morning. Michelin-starred Aeternum closes permanently after failed sale. Emma scanned the article. Gavin had tried to find a buyer, but the restaurant's toxic reputation had poisoned any potential deals. The space would be converted to offices. The name Aeternum would disappear from New York's culinary landscape. "How do you feel about that?" Patricia asked carefully. Emma thought about it honestly. Sad for what it could have been, relieved that no more young chefs will be destroyed there. Grateful that I'm here instead of there. "Gavin Hale has disappeared completely," Patricia added. "No social media presence, no interviews, no new ventures. It's like he evaporated." "Maybe that's what he needs," Emma said. "Time away from the spotlight to figure out who he is without the accolades." Dorothy smiled. "You're more generous than most people would be. My mother taught me that holding on to anger is like cooking with a burned pot. Everything you make afterward tastes bitter." Emma turned back to look at Hearthlight. "I'd rather focus on this." The next 2 weeks were a blur of final preparations. Emma hired staff carefully, experienced chefs who'd committed to teaching with patience and respect. She developed a curriculum that balanced technical skills with business knowledge, recognizing that culinary talent meant nothing if you couldn't sustain a career. She designed a dining experience where students would cook for paying customers, but mistakes would be treated as learning opportunities, not catastrophes. On opening day, Emma arrived at 5 a.m. too nervous to sleep. She walked through the empty kitchen, touching equipment, adjusting the placement of tools, making sure everything was perfect. By 8 o'clock, the students began arriving. They were exactly who Emma had hoped for, nervous, excited, carrying the weight of circumstances that had tried to crush them. A 40-year-old woman who'd worked in diners her whole life and dreamed of something more. A 19-year-old who taught himself to cook watching videos while living in his car. A grandmother who'd fed her community through church kitchens and wanted formal training to open her own restaurant. Emma gathered them in the teaching kitchen, standing where her mother had once stood in that small bistro, where she herself had stood as a student before life derailed her plans. "Welcome to Hearthlight," she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "You're here because you have talent, determination, and stories that deserve to be told through your cooking. This program isn't about creating the next Michelin-starred chef or teaching you to cook for people in penthouses who eat gold leaf and foam." A few students smiled. "This is about giving you the skills, knowledge, and confidence to build sustainable culinary careers, to feed your communities, to create businesses that reflect your values, to cook food that matters to real people living real lives." She paused, looking at each face. "Some of you will open restaurants. Some will become caterers or food truck owners or private chefs. Some might discover you're better at the business side than the cooking side. And that's fine too. The goal is to find your path, not to follow someone else's definition of success." Emma pulled out her mother's old knife, the one she'd inherited after the funeral, its handle worn smooth from decades of use. "My mother believed food is love made visible. She believed everyone who wants to cook deserves a chance to learn, regardless of where they start. She created the trust that made this program possible, even though she never got to see it happen." Her voice caught slightly. "We're going to honor her vision by treating each other with respect, by celebrating mistakes as learning opportunities, and by remembering that the people we cook for are humans who deserve our best effort, whether they're paying $5 or $500. She set down the knife and smiled. "Now let's cook." The first day was chaotic and wonderful. Students struggled with techniques, burned things, asked 1,000 questions, and slowly began to find their rhythm. Emma moved between stations offering guidance, correction, encouragement, remembering how her own hands had trembled the first time she'd tried to brunoise vegetables. The dining room opened for lunch that day, serving a simple menu of dishes the students had prepared. The neighborhood showed up: Emma's aunt, Dorothy, and the foundation board, local residents who'd watched the renovation with curiosity, reporters covering the opening. Emma watched from the kitchen as plates went out, as customers tasted the food, as faces lit up with genuine appreciation. Not because the cooking was perfect, it wasn't, but because it was honest, made with care by people who were being given a chance. Dorothy found her during the afternoon lull. "The board wants you to know we're incredibly proud. This is everything we hoped it would be." "It's only day one," Emma said. "We have a long way to go." "But you've already changed 20 lives." "That's not nothing." That evening, after the last student had left and the kitchen was cleaned, Emma sat alone in the dining room with a cup of tea. Her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from people she'd met through the foundation, interview requests from food writers, even a text from Marcus, Gavin's former sous chef, saying he'd applied for a teaching position. But the message that made Emma's eyes blur with tears was from an unknown number. "Saw the article about Hearthlight. Your mother would be incredibly proud. So am I. GH." Emma didn't respond. There was nothing that needed to be said. She looked around the dining room, at the mismatched chairs and reclaimed wood tables, at the chalkboard menu listing simple dishes made with care, at the photos on the wall showing her mother in various kitchens throughout her career. Gavin had told her she would never sit at a table like his. He'd been right in a way. She'd built her own table instead, a better one. And every day 20 students would sit there with her, learning that they belonged exactly where they were, that their backgrounds didn't define their potential, that excellence and kindness could coexist, that food was meant to nourish bodies and souls, not egos. Emma raised her teacup in a silent toast to her mother, to Dorothy and the foundation, to every student who'd walked through Hearthlight's doors today, and even to Gavin Hale, who'd tried to destroy her, and instead, inadvertently, had shown her exactly what kind of chef she wanted to be. The kind who built tables instead of burning bridges. The kind who opened doors instead of slamming them. The kind who remembered that every person in a kitchen, from the delivery cyclist to the Michelin-starred chef, deserved to be treated with dignity. Outside, Queens settled into evening. Somewhere across the river, the glass towers of Manhattan glittered with their usual indifference. But here, in this small corner of Astoria, something genuine had taken root. And tomorrow, it would grow. Justice wasn't about revenge or watching empires crumble, Emma realized. Justice was about building something better from the ruins. Justice was Hearthlight. If this story touched you, share it, comment, and subscribe for more soul-warming stories.